Welcome back to Boring Science for Sleep. If you enjoy these quiet work histories, leave a comment and consider liking and subscribing. Tonight we're stepping into the slow process of Linotype typesetting in a mid-century newspaper composing room. You arrive before sunrise, when the shop is already warm from the pot heater. The air carries a thin mix of oil, paper dust, and yesterday's ink. You unlock the machine, check the level of molten type metal, and let the thermostat hold steady. Then your hands settle at the keyboard, and each line begins as a small, deliberate sequence of matrices and spaces. Between casts, you listen for the even cadence of ejecting slugs, and you watch justification so the columns stay calm and straight. And as the first urgent copy arrives, what do you do when a tiny change in temperature starts frosting the slugs and threatens a distributor jam? You don't rush. You let the machine tell you what it's feeling, you watch the surface of the molten metal, and you listen to the faint change in the burner's breath. A pot that's a little too cool will thicken at the edges, and a pot that's a little too hot will smoke and sting. The frosting you're seeing is subtle, a pale haze on the fresh slugs, like chilled glass. So you make your first small decision of the day, and you turn the thermostat up only a notch. Then you wait, because heat moves through metal slowly, and this work always rewards patience. You wipe your hands on a rag that has lived in your back pocket for years. You check the oil cups, one by one, and you give the moving points a careful drink. The motor hum is steady, but the belts are still waking up, soft leather finding its grip. On the stone beside you, yesterday's proof paper is stacked and curled at the corners. There's a familiar weight in the room, a quiet readiness, as if the walls remember deadlines. And then you see it, pinned to a board where notices go to be noticed and then forgotten. A note from the foreman, written fast, says the morning edition needs a late city council item. It's not a crisis, not yet, but it changes the shape of the morning. It means the first pages won't be as gentle as they usually are. It means you'll be setting type while the story is still being argued over upstairs. You pull your stool in closer and you let your fingers rest over the keys. The Linotype keyboard feels like a small piano that only plays one song. Lowercase on the left, capitals on the right, and spacebands waiting like quiet teeth. You touch the brass and steel lightly, and you begin with something simple. Obituaries, shipping notices, small ads for used refrigerators and second-hand suits. Copy that comes in a calm trickle, the kind that lets you settle into your own rhythm. You feed the first sheet into your attention, and you start to translate words into metal. Each keystroke releases a matrix, a little brass mold with a letter cut into its face. You can't see the letter clearly in the dim light, but you trust the channels. The matrices slide down, guided by gravity and rails, and they collect into a line. When you reach the end, you add spacebands, thin wedges that will expand later. Then your hand goes to the lever, and you bring the line into position. The elevator lifts it, and the machine prepares to cast. A clean cast has a sound you learn to love, a solid hiss and a firm click. The molten metal flows into the mold, meets the matrices, and becomes a slug. It's still warm when it drops into the galley tray, heavy and precise. You lift the fresh slug, careful but not fearful, and you glance at the face. The frosting is less now, which tells you the small thermostat change was right. But the day doesn't stay still for long. A copy boy comes in, shoes squeaking faintly on the floor, and he drops a bundle of early items. The pages are creased, smudged, and corrected in the margins with hurried pencil. Somebody has torn the top corner off one sheet, and a line is missing. You pause, because missing words are worse than misspelled ones. You look toward the copy desk, but there's no one to ask yet. So you make another decision, quiet and practical. You set the line you have, and you leave a small blank space where the missing words should be. You mark the copy with your own pencil, a simple note that says, "Check this." Then you keep going, because the machine is warm and waiting, and time moves forward. The composing room itself feels like a sheltered place built for repetition. long tables, tight cases pushed against walls, even if most work is cast now. A few men already at their stations, heads bent, each of you in your own small pool of light. Overhead, bulbs buzz softly, and somewhere a clock ticks with a stubborn steadiness. You set another obituary, and you notice how the language always turns the same way. Beloved husband, survived by services at. It's work that asks for accuracy more than creativity, and accuracy in this room is a kind of calm. The first proof slips come back sooner than you'd like. A proofreader's marks, neat and sharp, circle a mispacing and a swapped letter. Not dramatic errors, just the ordinary mistakes that happen when eyes and fingers get tired. You pick up the slug in question, and it has the slightest burr on one edge. That burr tells you the mold might have caught a speck of dross. You recast the line, slower, making sure the matrices seat cleanly. The second slug drops with a better sound, and the face looks crisper. You place it in the corrected pile, and you feel the room's rhythm tighten, because a tighter clock doesn't announce itself loudly. It arrives as a faster return of proof paper. It arrives as the stone man clearing space with brisker hands. It arrives as the foreman walking through more often, not speaking, just watching. The morning edition is always a living thing. It changes shape while you're building it, and then, sooner than expected, the messenger comes back. This time he carries a fresh sheet, still warm from the typewriter upstairs. City Council item. Late vote. A new name you haven't said before, with an unfamiliar spelling that could turn into a complaint. There are also numbers, and numbers are unforgiving in print. You read the line twice before you touch the keys. You set the first paragraph carefully, listening to the release of each matrix. There's a particular clack for the common letters, and a rarer note for the ones you don't use much. The letter queue in the magazine is like a small city, each character living in its own channel. When you call for a letter, it comes down obediently, unless something is sticky. You feel the earliest hint of stickiness now. Not a jam, just a hesitation. A fraction of a second when the matrix doesn't drop cleanly. You stop your fingers mid-air, and you wait for the machine to settle. Then you press again, and the matrix comes, as if it had to think about it. This is the kind of detail most readers never imagine. The paper comes out clean and flat, and they think words simply appear. But here, words are heavy, and they have to be coaxed into place. You decide to keep your pace cautious, even as the copy gets hotter. A cautious pace means fewer mistakes, and fewer mistakes means fewer recasts. Recasts are where time disappears. So you work the line to completion, and you watch the justification lever do its work. Spacebands expand, pressing outward, making the line exactly the right length. Justification is a small miracle, repeated hundreds of times a day. Not magic, just wedges and pressure and careful tolerances. When it's right, the line locks tight, and the cast is clean. When it's wrong, you get a loose line, and the slugs won't hold square on the stone. The council story isn't long yet, but you can feel its weight in the room. People upstairs will revise it again, you know they will. But your job is to set what exists now, and be ready to alter it later. You take the next sheet, and you notice corrections already. A scratched-out phrase. A new clause written above the line in cramped handwriting. Somebody's pencil has torn the paper slightly where they pressed too hard. You set it as best you can, making decisions as you go. Is that a 7 or a 1? Is that an O or a 0? You lean closer, and the smell of paper and graphite rises up. You choose the most likely reading, and you mark the copy so the editor can confirm. Then you cast. The slug drops into the galley tray with a dull confidence. But when you pick it up, you see a faint rounding on one letter's shoulder. Not enough to ruin it, but enough to worry you. Rounded tight can mean the metal is cooling too fast, or the mold isn't filling completely. It can also mean the metal mix is off. Too much lead, not enough antimony and tin. In this shop, the alloy is usually steady, but steady things drift over time. You glance at the pot again. The surface looks calm, but there's a skin forming at the edge, thin and grey. So you make another small choice. You skim the surface lightly, lifting dross with a slotted spoon, careful not to splash. Dross is the tired part of the metal, oxide and impurities, and it doesn't cast well. You drop it into a waiting can, and the can gives back a soft metallic clink. The pot looks cleaner now, the surface more glassy. You let the heat recover, and you keep setting, because the story isn't going to wait for perfect conditions. Across the room, the proofreader clears his throat softly, a signal more than a sound. A fresh set of galleys is ready to be read. You slide your tray toward the proof press, and you watch as ink is rolled thinly across the type. The roller's sound is a gentle tack, 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 steady as a metronome. A sheet of paper is laid down, pressure applied, and the proof is lifted. There's something satisfying in seeing your lines printed, even as temporary proofs. They look like a small promise, but the promise has to be checked, and the pencil marks will come back. They do come back, and they come back quickly. A misspelling in a councilman's name. A transposed digit in a vote count. The kind of errors that don't feel dramatic until they're on the street. You feel the schedule tighten again. You can't change the whole story, but you can fix these lines. So you pull the offending slugs one by one, setting them aside in a separate pile. They're still usable metal later when they're remelted. But for now they're wrong. You reset the corrected lines, watching your own fingers slow down deliberately. You can go fast and be wrong, or go steady and be right. In this room, being right is the only kind of speed that matters. As you work, you keep an ear on the distributor. Above, the matrices that have been cast return upward, carried by the distributor bar. They ride along until they reach their proper channel, then they drop in with a tiny click. The clicks should be even, like light rain on a window, but now and then you hear a different note, slightly dull, a matrix landing not quite cleanly, a hesitation before it finds its home. You glance up and see nothing obvious, but your body notices before your eyes do. The machine is speaking in small changes. You stop for a moment, just long enough to run your fingers along the edge of the magazine. There's a trace of dust there, mixed with oil, the fine grit of paper fibers. Dust can build up, and dust can slow a matrix, so you take a brush and you give the rails a gentle cleaning. You don't dismantle anything yet. You just clear what you can reach, and you wipe the rest with a clean rag. The next cast sounds better. The next line justifies neatly, and for a few minutes, the work becomes almost soothing again. The council item continues, paragraph after paragraph. Each one a small unit you can hold. You begin to see how it will fit in a column. Not perfectly, but close. You think in measures without noticing you're thinking. Column inches, point sizes. How many lines in a given depth? The stone man will assemble it all later, but your lines have to behave. And then the foreman's presence changes the air. He doesn't shout. He never needs to. He just steps near your station, and you can feel the question he isn't asking. How close are you? How clean are the slugs? How much time is left? He hands you another slip of paper, and you see the words, Page 1 Reshuffle. The council item is being promoted. It's moving up, becoming larger, taking space from something else. That means your lines have to fit a new shape. Same words, different container. You nod once, because talking would only spend breath. Now you're doing a different kind of work, not just setting type, but reshaping it without changing meaning. You pull the galleys, and you measure the length with a practiced eye. You can feel the difference between a line that's tight and a line that's loose. You can also feel the coming problem. To make the story fit, you'll have to re-justify sections, recast slugs, maybe adjust breaks, and every time you recast, you invite the machine to misbehave again. You look at the pot, you look at the distributor, you look at the pile of corrected copy, now thicker, more demanding, and you choose your next action carefully. You decide to stabilize the machine before you chase the new layout, because if you start re-justifying while the distributor is half sticky, you'll lose more time later. So you pause the casting rhythm and take a small maintenance moment. You open the side panel gently. The inside smells of warm oil and metal, like an engine that has been running all night. You check the tension on a belt. You touch a bearing housing just to sense if it's running hot. You wipe away a thin line of grime where it's gathered. Then you return to the keyboard and you run a short test line. Just a simple sentence you can throw back into the pot later. The cast comes out clean. The face is sharp. No frosting. No rounding. The distributor clicks more evenly and the dull note is gone, at least for now. That's enough to proceed. You bring the council copy back to the center of your vision. You begin re-justifying line by line, adjusting where sentences break, not changing the words. Sometimes you recast a line simply to move a word down to the next. Sometimes you can solve it with a thin space, a change in spacing that the reader will never notice. You keep your hands steady and you let your shoulders soften. There's pressure, but it's the pressure of craft, not panic. The room brightens as morning pushes in through high windows. Dawn light turns the dust in the air into something visible, drifting slowly. You hear more movement now, editors arriving. Phones ringing upstairs. The ringing isn't for you, but you still feel it in your hands. It means more copy will come down soon, and it may not match what you've already built. You take the council story and you read it again, not for sense, but for shape. You look for short words that can float and long words that stubbornly take space. You mark the margins with tiny notes, break here, keep together, move down. It's quiet pencil work, but it changes everything that follows. On the stone, a rule and a column gauge lie within reach, cool and flat under your fingers. You slide the gauge along the galley, counting lines without counting out loud. You already know by feel how many lines make an inch in this face in this measure. The machine waits, warm and patient, and you let it wait a little longer. Because rejustifying isn't only casting new slugs. It's deciding which slugs are still correct and which ones only look correct until they meet a new column length. You lift a section of galley and tap it gently on the stone, squaring the ends. The slugs settle with a muted clink, like small bars being aligned. You separate the story into bites you can manage, a paragraph at a time. Then you choose one paragraph to sacrifice first, the one with the fewest names and numbers. It's safer to experiment there. You set the old slugs aside in order, face up, so you can return if you need to. The metal is slightly warm against your fingertips, not hot, just alive with stored heat. You pull the copy closer and begin again at the keyboard. Each key you press is a decision you can't fully take back, only remake. The matrices drop, one at a time, clean and obedient. For a moment, the machine's language is smooth again, and you can almost forget the reshuffle. You keep your right hand light on the Spaceband key. Too many spaces and the line will justify harshly, wedges forcing too far apart. Too few and you'll end up with thin, cramped type that looks anxious on the page. You want calm type that sits like it belongs there. When you reach the end of the line, you pull the justification lever and listen. There's a soft, firm tightening, the spacebands expanding with controlled pressure. The line locks and the machine accepts it. The cast comes with its familiar hiss and the slug drops with a confident weight. You pick it up and check the face. Sharp, even. No pale frosting. That small comfort lets your shoulders loosen a fraction. Across the room, the stone man is already making room for page 1, moving furniture in his own quiet way. He slides a chase closer, a steel frame that will hold the whole page like a tray. He checks his quines, those expanding wedges that lock everything tight. He doesn't speak much, but his hands tell you he's preparing for commitment. Once the form is locked, it's not yours anymore. It belongs to the press. And that thought makes you careful. You keep setting. You recast a line only to change where the break falls, moving one word down, lifting another up. It feels strange, changing nothing and changing everything. The meaning stays, the shape shifts. You glance at the galley of old slugs and see how wasteful the process looks to someone who doesn't know it. Perfectly good metal, perfectly good words, now wrong only because the column has changed. But metal is forgiving in a print shop. Wrong today becomes useful tomorrow, when it's melted and cast again. A small economy of heat and patience. You continue into a denser part of the council copy where the sentences grow long. Long sentences are harder because they don't like to land on a clean line ending. They sprawl. They insist. You keep them under control by watching the measure, the invisible width your lines must fit. You begin to anticipate the end of a line before it arrives. Your fingers slow slightly as you near it, as if you're easing a wagon into a narrow gate. This is where experience shows, not as speed, but as restraint. The machine continues its steady music. Matrices down, assembler gathering, elevator up, metal in. Slug out, matrices returning to the magazine above, clicking home. You listen for that click pattern as you work, because it's the earliest warning. A distributor doesn't fail all at once. It complains first, very softly. As the morning fills in, the air changes again. More bodies, more paper being handled. A little more warmth, a little more dust. The composing room always smells like a combination of ink, oil, and damp newsprint. And underneath, the sweet, faint metallic smell of hot type metal. Lead has a smell when it's warm, not loud, but unmistakable. It sits at the back of your throat like a memory. You reach for the copy and see a new pencil mark in the margin. A fresh correction, delivered silently, likely passed from desk to desk. A single word changed, but it changes the line length. That's how it goes. A tiny edit becomes a physical problem. You don't resent it, you just adjust. You pull two slugs, slide them out, and place them in the discard channel. Then you set the corrected line, recast, and replace. The galley is a living strip, always being trimmed and patched. You keep the replaced slugs close, not yet melted, because sometimes corrections bounce back. An editor changes his mind. A name is spelled two ways in two sources. Someone upstairs decides the first number was right after all. In this job, you learn not to throw anything away too quickly. You learn to keep evidence. A small pile of wrong slugs becomes your proof of what the copy used to say. It's a quiet insurance policy. Now the pot catches your eye again. Not because it's obviously wrong, but because the surface has shifted. The skin at the edge has returned, thin as paper. You see it when the light hits at an angle, a dull rim against the brighter center. The machine has been casting steadily, and steady casting oxidizes the metal. The air touches it, the heat works, and dross forms again. You can ignore it for a while, but ignoring it tends to show up later as rounded type, or a small void on the face. So you stop at a natural break. You let the line you're on finish its cycle, then you pause the keyboarding. You take the slotted skimmer, and you draw it across the surface with a slow hand. The dross gathers like grey oatmeal, soft but stubborn. You lift it carefully, letting the clean metal drain back through the slots. A thin ribbon of silver returns to the pot. You deposit the dross into the can again, and the can answers with that familiar clink. Then you look at the ingots. In a bin beside the machine, there are small pigs of type metal, dull and heavy. A proper Linotype alloy is mostly lead, but not only lead. It needs antimony for hardness and a little tin for good flow and sharp casting. In a busy shop, the mix stays roughly right because everyone is adding the same ingots. But when the pot has been skimmed, and when old slugs get remelted again and again, the balance can drift. You don't test it with instruments. You test it with your eyes and your fingertips, with the way a fresh slug looks, with whether the face comes out crisp without pleading. You decide to add a small amount. Not much, just enough to refresh the pot. You pick up an ingot and feel the weight of it, a compact heaviness that always surprises new hands. You lower it into the pot carefully, not dropping it, letting it ease in and melt. There's a quiet change in sound, a soft simmer as the cold metal meets the hot. You wait. Heat takes time to become even. While you wait, you wipe the pot rim with a rag, clearing residue so nothing flakes in later. You glance at the thermostat dial and you leave it where it is. You've already nudged it once today. Too much fiddling leads to chasing your own tail. When the surface looks calm again, you return to the keyboard. The council copy waits, and so does the new shape it must become. You begin again, and the first few slugs after adding metal look better. A little brighter, a little sharper. You don't celebrate. You just accept the evidence and keep going. The proofreader comes by without hurry, but with purpose. He sets a marked proof on the edge of your stone, careful not to smear the pencil. His marks are small, disciplined, a turned quote mark, a comma that should be a period, a space that opened a little too wide in justification. He doesn't tell you stories, he gives you facts. You nod once, and you begin the fixes. Fixing is different from setting. Setting is flow, fixing is interruption. You have to locate the slug, verify it, pull it, and replace it without disturbing the neighboring lines. You do it with a small bodkin tool, prying gently, lifting just enough. The slugs are tight in the galley, and they like to stay that way. You remove the single offending line and set it aside, then you reset it on the machine, making sure the punctuation is correct this time. The corrected slug drops, and you slide it into place like a puzzle piece. The galley looks whole again, but the schedule doesn't loosen. It tightens, quietly as page 1 starts to solidify elsewhere. You can feel it when the stone man begins assembling other elements around the space reserved for your council column. A headline form, a photograph block, if there is one today. Rules, those thin metal lines that box things in. Everything interlocks. Your column has to arrive not only correct, but on time enough to be locked with the others. You work through another paragraph, then another. And as you do, you start to notice an old problem returning. Not in the slugs, in the sound above. The distributor clicks are still mostly even, but one channel has a slightly sticky return. It's the kind of thing you hear only when you're listening without strain. A click that comes late by a heartbeat, a faint scrape as a matrix rides a rail a little too closely. You glance up again, nothing dramatic. No obvious pileup, but you've learned that a Linotype rarely gives you a surprise without warning. It gives you hints. You decide to take another small pause. Not long, just enough to prevent a bigger loss later. You stop the keyboarding after a cast, leaving the machine between tasks. You open the distributor cover and lean in. The inside is warmer than your face expects, and you smell hot oil. You look along the distributor bar, that moving piece that carries matrices and sorts them by teeth patterns. Each matrix has a unique set of notches, like a tiny code. The bar reads the code, and the matrix drops into its channel. It's a mechanical form of literacy, metal reading metal. You run a brush lightly along a rail. A little dust comes away, grey and soft. You wipe it off the brush onto a rag, then you check for a burr, a tiny raised edge that can catch. You don't find one, but you do see a spot where oil has thickened into a tacky film. Old oil and paper dust make a paste, and paste makes hesitation. You clean it with a rag dampened with solvent, careful not to drip anything into the wrong place. You work slowly, because this is the kind of work where haste creates new problems. When it looks clean, you close the cover and run the machine gently. You set a short test line, nothing important, and you watch the matrices return. The click pattern is better, not perfect, but steadier. That's enough. You return to the council copy with your attention narrowed again. The reshuffled layout requires one more adjustment, shortening the column by a small amount. Not much, but enough to force another round of rebreaks. You accept it. You take the last few paragraphs you've already set, and you measure them. Then you identify the section where you can compress without changing wording. Not by squeezing letters, by redistributing line endings, letting the justification do a slightly different dance. You recast a group of lines, working carefully to avoid loose spacing. As you do, you notice one letter appearing slightly softer again, a rounded shoulder on a common character. It's subtle, but it's there. You check the slug face under the shop light and tilt it. A faint dullness on one corner, you run your thumb along the side and feel a tiny roughness, a burr from trimming. Or the metal is just a shade cooler in the mold at that moment. Either way, it's not yet a crisis. But you make a note in your mind, because small notes become big savings later. The proofreader's pencil doesn't forgive softened type when it prints fuzzy. You continue, building your revised column into something that now matches the new space. When the paragraph blocks are complete, you slide the galley toward the stone man. He takes it with a nod, and he begins placing your slugs into the chase, assembling the column. He uses furniture blocks, wood or metal pieces that fill the empty areas and hold the type tight. He places leads and slugs, rules and spacing, all fitting together like a quiet structure. You watch for a moment, not because you don't trust him, because it's calming to see the words take their place in the larger page. It's also a reminder that your work is now connected to everyone else's. If your column comes up short, the whole page shifts. If your column runs long, someone else loses space. So you stand by, ready to supply an extra line or remove one depending on what the layout demands. The foreman passes again. He looks at the page one stone, then at you. He doesn't say much, but he does say one thing, quietly. They want the council figure checked again. Just to be sure, that's the kind of sentence that makes you go still inside. Not because it's alarming, because it means a correction might be coming, and corrections to numbers ripple through every line. You ask for the copy sheet, and it's brought over. The figure is there, written clearly now in dark pencil, as if someone traced it twice. But on a second sheet, the same figure appears different, one digit changed. You don't decide which is right. That's not your job. Your job is to prepare for either outcome. You locate where the number appears in your slugs. You find the exact line. You mark the slug in the galley with a small piece of paper, a flag. So if the correction comes, you can pull it fast without searching. This is another kind of speed, preparation speed. You go back to small items while you wait, other copy that still needs setting, a late classified, a shipping notice, a short community announcement. These pieces are simple compared to the council story, and they steady your hands. They also use common letters, keeping the magazine cycling. You notice as you set a shipping notice that the machine's rhythm has slightly changed again. Not the distributor this time. The casting, a slightly different hiss, a softer fill, as if the metal flow is not as eager. You check the pot thermometer, and it reads a shade lower than earlier. Not much, but enough to explain the softened edges you saw. Heat drifts, burners breathe, a door opens in the building, a draft passes, and the system shifts a little. You decide to adjust, but gently. A small turn on the thermostat, no more than a notch. Then you wait again, letting the pot catch up. While you wait, you do what Linotype operators always do when time is tight. You check the copy basket, and you sort the next slips into a neat, workable stack. You keep the council story on top, but you give yourself smaller pieces underneath it. You want something you can finish in one calm stretch while the pot comes back to even heat. You slide a classified into position, and you read it once, with no hurry. A used washing machine, a phone number, a neighborhood name that will only matter to a few. You set it anyway, because the page needs these small anchors. You press the keys with a steady touch, and you let the assembler gather what you've called down. The line forms quietly, matrices shoulder to shoulder, and the spacebands wait at the end. You keep your ear on the casting sound because your eyes are already busy. The hiss grows a little brighter as the thermostat's change takes hold. It's not dramatic, just a steadier breath of metal into the mold. You cast the line, and the slug drops into the tray with a firmer weight. You pick it up, and you tilt it to the light. The edges look crisper, and the face has that clean, square look that prints kindly. You set the slug into a galley, and you keep moving. This is what you do when time presses in close. You don't fight the pressure head on. You keep the work small, correct, and continuous. Across the room, the proof press takes another pull, tack, 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 as the roller passes. A proof sheet lifts, and you see it carried away with 2 fingers, careful at the corners. A composing room has its own careful ways of holding paper. Oil on fingertips can make a grey thumbprint that shows in the wrong place. So you wipe your hands again, and you keep the rag near. You glance toward your flagged slug in the council column, the one with the disputed figure. It's still there, waiting like a loose tooth. You don't touch it yet. You just make sure you could reach it fast if the call comes. You set another short notice, a meeting time, a street address, a hall name. The words are plain, and that plainness is restful. Your fingers know what to do with plain words. The matrices fall easily for common letters, and the magazine's channels sound satisfied. Then you hear a footstep approach, and you don't look up right away. In this room, a lot of footsteps pass for no reason at all, but this one slows beside your stone. The foreman sets a new slip down, and his hand lingers for a moment. He doesn't need to speak loudly. His voice is low, almost casual, but it carries consequence. The city desk confirms the figure. It's the second one, not the first. You nod once, and you pick up your pencil. You don't show annoyance, because there's no use for it. Numbers get checked when they get checked, and paper doesn't care about anyone's feelings. You slide your stool back, and you go to the galley where the flagged slug sits. You find it by touch as much as sight, because you marked it for this moment. You lift the line out gently, using the bodkin, keeping the neighboring slugs tight. The slug comes free with a small metallic sigh, and you place it face up on a clean spot. You read the number on the metal, just to confirm what you're changing. Then you lay the corrected copy beside your keyboard, where it won't drift. Numbers on a Linotype keyboard are a particular kind of attention. They're not hard, but they don't forgive. You check the style the paper wants, whether it spells out smaller numbers, whether it uses figures for votes. This one stays in figures, because council tallies tend to. You set the line again, slowly enough to feel each digit. You watch the assembling line, making sure you haven't dropped an extra space. You justify with care because one digit can change the measure, and the Spacebands will respond. You pull the lever, and you listen to the line tighten. The machine accepts it, and you cast. The new slug drops warm and clean, and you pick it up without rushing. You check the face, then you check the number again. Only when you've seen it twice do you return to the galley. You slide the corrected slug into the space, and you tap the line ends to square them. The column looks whole again, and you feel the smallest easing in your chest. Not relief exactly, just the calm that comes from one problem being returned to order. You mark the old wrong slug with a quick scratch, so it won't wander back by mistake. Then you set it in the discard pile, where it will wait for the remelt. In a newspaper shop, wrong metal isn't wasted. It's just delayed. The proofreader appears again, not hurried, but closer than before. He holds a fresh proof, still smelling of ink. He points with the eraser end of his pencil to the corrected figure. You watch his eyes travel across it, and you wait. He nods, and that nod is as good as a stamped approval. Then he moves on, because there are other columns, other little errors waiting to be found. You return your attention to the Linotype, and you take a moment to study the Distributor again. The clicks are mostly even, but you notice something you hadn't noticed earlier. A faint change in the way the matrices ride back, like a tiny reluctance on the climb. It's subtle, and it could be nothing, but it has the same feeling as a drawer that doesn't slide perfectly. You know from experience that nothing can become a jam in a single careless minute, so you make a choice that costs time now to save more time later. You stop after the next cast, with the machine in a safe pause between cycles. You open the Distributor cover, and you let the warm air rise out toward your face. Inside, the parts look clean enough, but you don't trust looks alone. You take the brush again, and you work along the rails with a patient hand. A little paste of oil and dust comes away, more than you expected. It gathers on the bristles like grey lint. You wipe the brush on the rag, then brush again. You don't scrape hard. Hard scraping makes burrs, and burrs make new trouble. You check the star wheel and the pawls by sight, looking for a worn edge or a nick. Nothing obvious, but you can see a slight shine where metal has been rubbing metal. Shine can mean normal wear. It can also mean a part is working harder than it should. You dab a small amount of fresh oil where the manual suggests, not everywhere, just where it matters. Too much oil turns into the same sticky film you're trying to avoid. Then you close the cover and run a test. You set a short line of nonsense words, just enough to cycle common letters and a few capitals. The machine clacks, the elevator lifts, and the slug drops. The matrices return upward, and you watch them like birds landing on wires. Click, click, click. Even again, at least for the moment. You take the test slug and toss it into the remelt chute, where it will go back home. The pot gives a quiet, muffled response as the metal returns. You glance at the pot's surface. It looks calmer now, the heat steadier, the shimmer more uniform. That small steadiness matters more than people think. Linotype work is a chain of small tolerances. If the heat drifts, the cast changes. If the cast changes, the proof changes. If the proof changes, the page slows. So you keep the heat steady, and you keep yourself steady with it. On the stone, the council column is now in place, surrounded by other elements. A headline area above it, a rule line to one side, furniture blocks filling gaps like quiet carpentry. The stone man leans in and checks the fit with his fingertips. He presses down lightly on the column, feeling for rock or lift. Type that isn't level can print unevenly, light in one spot, heavy in another. He doesn't say anything, but you see him adjust a thin piece of material under one corner, a make-ready habit. Paper and press are never perfectly flat. You correct for it with small shims, with careful packing, with experience. A linotype operator learns to respect that too. Your slugs can be perfect, and the press can still teach you humility. Another editor comes down the stairs, and you hear him before you see him. The stair treads complain softly, and the door swings in on a familiar hinge squeal. He carries a narrow strip of copy, a last-minute addition. Not a rewrite, just a brief update, a single paragraph to add near the end. It's the sort of thing that seems harmless until you measure it. Because a new paragraph means space. Space means something else has to move, or shrink, or give way. The editor looks at the stone man, then at you. He speaks quietly, as if volume alone could waste time. Can we tuck it in? You don't answer with words yet. You take the slip and you read it, looking for its length and its shape. You can feel the line count in your head. You can hear the column depth as if it's a physical container. You walk to the stone, and you look at the column's bottom. There's a small breathing space there, but not enough for a full paragraph. So you consider options that don't change meaning. A slightly tighter headline, a smaller break between items, or shifting a line of the adjacent story. This is where the composing room becomes a quiet negotiation. No one raises their voice. Hands point, pencils mark, gauges slide along metal. You and the stone man exchange a look that says, "We can do it, but it will take care." You take the new paragraph back to your machine, and you begin to set it. As you type, you keep it clean because you already know it will be handled fast. Fast handling makes errors more likely. So you build it as if it will be proofed once and accepted. You choose line breaks that will give you flexibility. You avoid awkward hyphenations where you can, because hyphens make last-minute editing harder. The matrices drop smoothly, and you're grateful for that. You cast the paragraph into slugs, one line after another, and you keep them together in order. You don't mix them into other galleys. You keep them as a single unit, like a patch panel. Then you bring the patch to the stone. The stone man clears a small space, and he lifts the bottom portion of the council column slightly. He's careful, because lifting type can loosen it. Loose type can spill, and spilled type is a slow disaster. He slides in your new lines, and he measures again. Now the column runs long by a small amount, just a line or two. and 1 or 2 lines might as well be a mile at this point in the morning. You both stand quietly for a breath, looking at the page. Then the stone man points to a small gap above, an area where a rule and some white space sit more generously than they need to. You see it too. It's a comfort space, nice for the eye, but not sacred. He removes a thicker lead and replaces it with a thinner one. A tiny change, a metal strip exchanged like a coin. The column depth gains a little room, but not quite enough. So you make another adjustment, the kind that only shows up to trained eyes. You return to your machine and you choose one earlier line that can be recast to close up a loose space. Sometimes a line justifies with a little too much air because of word lengths and breaks. If you can change where one break falls, you can tighten several spaces at once. You find the line on the proof, locate it in the galley, and pull it. You set it again, with a different break, still the same words. You cast the new slug, compare it to the old, and you see the difference. The new line is calmer. The spacing is more even. It buys you a fraction of a line in total, not by cheating, but by distributing the white better. You replace it on the stone and the stone man measures again. Now the patch fits. The page breathes. Not as luxuriously as before, but enough. The editor watches, then nods once, and walks away without another word. That's how approvals happen here. Quietly, through absence, a job done well becomes invisible almost immediately. You look at the clock again, and you sense the deadline moving closer. Not like a threat, more like a tide. Downstairs, the pressmen will be waiting for the form. They can do a lot quickly, but they can't print a page that isn't locked. And locking is the point of no return. You hear the stone man begin to set the coins. He uses the coin key, turning it with a practiced wrist. The coins expand, pushing furniture and type outward until everything is tight in the chase. A locked form has a particular look. The type sits firm, like it belongs to the steel frame now. He tests it by trying to move a corner block with his finger. No movement. He taps the chase lightly, listening for a dull, solid sound instead of a rattle. A rattle means something is loose. Loose means type can fall out on the way to the press. So he listens, and he tightens again. Just a hair. The composing room grows quieter around this action. People speak less when a form is being locked. It's a shared superstition, but also a practical respect. One careless bump can undo an hour. You stand by your Linotype, hands resting lightly on the keyboard edge. You're ready, but there isn't much more to do for page 1 now. You've handed over what you can. You've fixed what was asked. Now the work becomes watching and waiting, and that waiting has its own duties. You clean as you wait, because clean machines behave better. You wipe the keyboard, clearing a dusting of paper fibers. You brush stray matrices away from the assembler entrance. You check that the Spaceband box is feeding smoothly, no bent bands caught at the lip. You keep your tools close. The bodkin, the brush, the rag, the small oil can with its long spout. They sit within reach like a quiet kit of promises. Then, in the middle of this calm, you hear it. Not loud, not sudden, but wrong. A sound above the keyboard line, near the distributor. A brief clatter, like a handful of thin brass pieces trying to occupy the same spot. You freeze your hands instantly, not touching another key. Your eyes go up. You see matrices hesitating at the distributor, not dropping cleanly into their channels. One sticks, then another catches behind it. The even rain of clicks becomes an uneven stutter. This is the thing you are preventing. And now it's here anyway because machines have their own timing. You stop the machine at once, not mid-cast, but as soon as it's safe, cutting motion before it can make the tangle worse. Silence follows, heavy and immediate. In a shop full of constant movement, a stopped Linotype draws attention like a light going out. The stone man glances over just once. He doesn't come running. He trusts you to handle your own trouble, but he needs to know whether you'll be down for minutes or longer. You lift the distributor cover again, more carefully now. You lean in, and you see the jam clearly. Matrices are stacked where they shouldn't be, Edges touching, teeth misaligned. They look like cards that have been shuffled badly. A few are tilted, caught on something small. A single nick can cause it. A bent ear on a matrix, a speck of hardened oil, a worn tooth on the distributor bar. You take a breath and you slow yourself down. A jam invites panic because it steals time. But panic breaks things, and broken parts steal more time than any jam ever did. You reach in with your fingertips first, feeling for the tension point. You don't yank. You test which matrix is holding the rest, the one acting like a wedge. You find it by the way the stack flexes. Then you use the bodkin to lift it slightly, freeing a corner. One matrix slips loose with a soft snap. You remove it and set it aside, face down so it doesn't get damaged. Then another comes free. You work in a slow unthreading, like easing knots out of string. Each matrix you remove gets placed in a neat line on the stone. You keep them in order as best you can, not because they must be, but because it helps your mind stay orderly. As the pressure releases, the jam relaxes. The stack reduces from a pile to a few stubborn pieces. You find one matrix with a slightly bent corner. It's small, but it's enough. It must have been dropped at some point, or caught in the assembler, and now it's paying you back. You set that one aside separately, because it can't go back in until it's straightened or replaced. Then you inspect the distributor teeth, looking for the reason it caught. You see a faint burr on a guide, a tiny rough edge that shouldn't be there. Maybe it formed from wear. Maybe a hard piece of debris rode along and scarred the metal. Either way, it's a catch point. You take a small stone file and touch it lightly, just enough to smooth without changing the shape. This is delicate work. Too much filing changes the geometry, and geometry is the whole point of a distributor. You wipe away the fine dust, then you oil sparingly again. You look at the magazine and you realize what the jam has cost you. A few matrices are now off the machine and one is damaged. That means one character will be scarce until it's replaced. In a Linotype shop, scarcity shows up in strange ways. If you're missing a common letter, like a lowercase e, you'll feel it immediately. If you're missing a less common one, it will surprise you later, in the middle of a name. You check the damaged matrix's marking, and you feel a small resignation. It's a character you're going to need, sooner or later. You roll it between your fingers and read the tiny identification marks with your eyes closed. It's one of those letters that doesn't show up often until it does. Not a friendly vowel, a consonant that hides in proper names, in street names, in the small exact words city clerks like to use. You set it aside on a clean rag where it won't get scratched. Then you look at the magazine again and imagine the hole it leaves behind. A Linotype magazine is a neighborhood of channels. Each channel is a single character, repeated as many times as the machine can carry. When one channel runs short, you don't always notice at first. You notice when the keyboard calls for it, and nothing arrives. A key pressed, and a silence where a matrix should have dropped. You've got work to do, and not much time for a mechanic's repair. So you make a decision that's less about fixing and more about adapting. You'll keep casting, but you'll keep your eyes open for that missing letter's shadow. You close the distributor cover carefully. You don't slam it. Slammed covers become misalignments, and misalignments become new jams. You turn the machine by hand for a moment, just a gentle cycle, listening for scrape. The motion feels smooth enough to trust. Then you power it back on. The hum returns, familiar and low, like a small heater waking up. You set a short test line again, not for content, but for movement. Matrices drop. The assembler gathers them. The elevator lifts. Metal fills the mold. A slug lands in the tray. And above, the distributor returns the matrices with a clean, even pattern of clicks. It's not a promise that the problem is gone. It's just evidence that you can keep going without making it worse. You put the test slug into the remelt chute, and you watch it disappear. The pot accepts it like a quiet tide. Now you look toward the stone, where page 1 is nearly ready. The chase is locked, the coins tightened, and the page looks like a dense little city of metal. The stone man's hands move over it with a kind of courtesy. He checks corners, presses gently, listens for rattle. Your counsel column sits there among headlines and rules, no longer just your work. And still, there's always one more small thing that can come down the stairs. A last correction, a swapped line, a name that was spelled one way in the minutes and another way in the reporter's notes. You stay at your machine because you're still useful here. A Linotype operator doesn't only cast new copy. You're also the shop's quiet capacity for sudden change. You keep your hands near the keyboard and your tools laid out in their places. Brush, bodkin, rag, oil can. You glance at the battered matrix you set aside, and you decide not to try straightening it yourself. Some operators can do it with a small vise and a careful touch. But a bent matrix is a risky thing. If you straighten it imperfectly, it will ride wrong, and it can cause another jam. A damaged matrix is small, but it can stop an entire page. So you leave it for the mechanic, and you work around it for now. That's the practical kindness of a shop that has to print every day. Do what you can. Don't make tomorrow's trouble bigger than it needs to be. A copy boy comes through again, not with page 1, but with a handful of later items. The next pages are still being assembled upstairs. Sports, markets, a short piece about a school board meeting. These aren't glamorous, but they keep the paper full. They also keep your machine busy while page 1 is being carried away. You take the first sheet, smooth it with your palm, and begin. The keyboard under your fingers has its own worn spots. Certain letters are polished brighter from constant use. Spaceband key, E, T, A. You press them without thinking, and the machine answers by releasing the brass pieces you asked for. For a while, it's steady work again. Paragraphs that don't need negotiating. Sentences that can break where they like. And then, in the middle of a proper name, it happens. You reach for that scarce letter, your finger presses the key, and nothing drops. There's a small empty pause in the assembler, like a missing tooth. You stop your hands, not in frustration, in precision. If you keep typing, the line will be wrong, and you'll have to dump it. So you hold still and look at the copy. It's a school board member's name, and the missing letter is right in the center. You can't change the name. That's not negotiable. You have 3 choices, and each one costs something. You can borrow the matrix from another machine. You can switch magazines, if there's a spare section with that character. Or you can set that one word by hand later, patching the line in the galley. Borrowing from another machine is often fastest, but it requires asking. And asking costs time, and it interrupts someone else's work. Switching magazines can be quick, but it risks introducing new misfeeds. Hand patching is calm and controlled, but it takes careful handling on the stone. You choose the simplest path that keeps the shop moving. You'll borrow. You stand, quietly, and walk to the next Linotype over. Another operator is there, setting smaller items, his machine running with its own steady song. You don't have to speak much, you just show him the copy and point to the letter. He understands immediately. Every operator has lived through letter scarcity. He opens his magazine access, reaches in with practiced fingers, and pulls a single matrix from the correct channel. A tiny brass rectangle, warm from being near the machine. He hands it to you the way a person hands a match in the dark. Careful, no ceremony. You thank him with a nod and return to your station. Now comes the delicate part. You need to place that borrowed matrix into your assembling line without upsetting the rest. You open the assembler area and slide it in where it belongs. The pieces sit together again. The name becomes whole. Then you continue typing the line, keeping your pace steady so you don't miscount. When the line is complete, you justify and cast. The slug drops cleanly. You pick it up and read the name on the metal. Correct. Spelled the way the copy says, letter by letter. Now you have to remember that the borrowed matrix won't return to its own magazine. When a Linotype distributes matrices, it distributes them to the magazine it has. So if you let that borrowed one ride up into your distributor, it will try to find a home in your channels. And your channels don't have the right place for it anymore. That's how confusion becomes a jam. So you intercept it. You open the distributor cover and watch for that particular matrix to come around. It rides up with the others, edges flashing softly. You recognize it by its slight difference in shine, or maybe by your own attention making it stand out. When it reaches a safe point, you lift it away with your fingertips. You set it on the rag, and you don't let it go through the full distribution. This is one of those little skills that never appears in the newspaper. A reader will never know you caught a single brass piece before it could cause trouble, but your hands know. And the shop keeps moving because of these small catches. You return the borrowed matrix to the other operator as soon as you can. You carry it back like a borrowed tool. He takes it, slips it back into his channel, and his machine continues as if nothing happened. Back at your station, you look again at the copy stack. There's plenty more to set, and now you have to watch for that missing letter every time a name appears. It's a quiet tax on your attention. Not terrible, just persistent. The composing room itself has shifted into a different phase now. Page 1 is no longer the center of the room. It's downstairs, or on its way. The urgency doesn't vanish, but it redistributes. Other pages become the next small emergencies. A Linotype room is like that. Pressure moves from one corner to another, never leaving completely. A boy calls up from the stairwell that the press room wants page 1. You don't see it leave, but you hear the sound of the chase being lifted, metal on metal. A controlled grunt, then footsteps, careful and heavy, descending. The footsteps have a particular tone when someone is carrying a locked form. Shorter steps, no sudden turns. The whole building seems to notice, and then let the sound pass. And as that sound fades, the composing room breathes again. Not relief, just the next stage. Now it's proofs, fixes, and cooperation across several stations. The proofreader moves like a quiet patrol, collecting galleys, returning them marked. He doesn't argue with the copy. He argues with errors. A turned letter, a broken serif, a space that opens too much, making a river of white down the column. You take his marks as they come, you fix what you can quickly, and you learn, in this hour, which fixes are worth recasting and which are better handled by the stone man with spacing. There's an art to not overcorrecting. If you recast every line with a tiny cosmetic flaw, you'll never finish. But if you ignore the wrong kind of flaw, it will print ugly and draw the eye. So you choose. You see a comma that should be a period. That gets recast. You see a slightly wide space in a line that still reads well. You leave it, unless it falls in a place the editor will notice. You see a broken face, where a piece of metal didn't fill the mold completely. That gets recast, because broken type prints like a stutter. The stone is crowded now. Galleys stacked. Slugs in lines. Furniture blocks waiting. Thin leads in small piles like dull silver ribbons. You keep your own area tidy, because a crowded stone can make you clumsy. And clumsy hands can spill a galley. A spilled galley doesn't sound like much until it happens. It's a sudden bright clatter, and then minutes of sorting by touch and squinting. So you keep things squared. You tap the ends of your galleys. You keep corrected slugs separate from discard slugs. You keep the proof sheets under a paperweight, so a draft doesn't shuffle them. A composing room has drafts. Doors open, the press room pulls air, and paper moves when you least expect it. At the next table, a compositor is hand-setting a short patch. Maybe it's a line with special characters your machine doesn't have enough of, or a bit of italic, or a last-minute label that needs a different face. He works from a case picking single pieces of type with a practiced pinch. It's slower than the Linotype, but it's flexible. And right now, flexibility matters, because your machine has a small scarcity. You watch him for a moment, not staring, just noticing. Handset type has a different sound. A faint click as each piece meets the next in the composing stick. A soft slide as he tightens the line. It's like listening to a quieter version of your own work. The shop runs on both machine and hand, even in the mid-century years when machines are everywhere. And tonight, in this shift, your jam has nudged the balance slightly back toward hands. It's not shameful, it's normal. Machines don't replace crafts, they rearrange them. You return to your copy and keep setting. A market report has numbers, fractions, and abbreviations. You move through it carefully because columns of figures demand straightness. A single miskeyed digit can embarrass the whole business desk. You keep your eyes on each character as it falls into the assembling line, not by reading it in the mirror, but by the rhythm of your fingers. There's a feeling when you've typed an extra character, a slight mismatch between what your mind expects and what your hands have done. You stop when you feel it. You don't wait for the proofreader to find it. You use the assembler release to dump the line back, sending matrices away before they're cast. They clatter down into the galley tray as loose pieces, a sound like rain on tin. Then you sweep them back into the correct path, letting the machine bring them home. Dumping a line feels like losing progress, but it's actually saving time. A dumped line takes seconds. A cast wrong line takes minutes, because it must be found, pulled, and replaced. You try again. This time the figures align. The cast comes out crisp. The numbers stand straight, square on the slug face. You set the slugs in a galley in strict order. Figures demand order. While you work, you keep one part of your mind on the pot, because steady casting draws the metal level down. The Linotype pot is not endless. It's a reservoir, heated and maintained, and it must be fed. Every few minutes you glance, checking the level mark. Not too low, or the pump can draw air and make bad casts. Not too high, or it can overflow if someone drops in too much for a melt at once. You add an ingot when it needs it. You lower it gently so it doesn't splash. You wait for the surface to quiet again. Then you continue, letting the heat recover in the background. A Linotype operator becomes good at waiting while working. You don't stare at the pot. You don't hover. You just fold the waiting into the rhythm of your tasks. A proof comes back with a mark you don't love. A letter looks light, not broken, but lighter than the rest. You pick up the slug and tilt it to the light. The face looks slightly frosted again, just on that one character. You touch the slug edge and feel it's a little cooler than the last ones. That tells you the pot temperature drifted down for a few cycles after the ingot. A cold ingot can do that, stealing heat before it fully melts. So, you decide to slow your casting pace for a few lines. Not stopping, just not pushing the machine. You let the pot catch up, the thermostat feeding heat back into the mass. It's like letting a kettle return to a simmer after you add cold water. While you ease, you take a moment to clear your discard chute. It's a narrow path where test slugs and wrong lines slide back to remelt. If it clogs, you end up with metal piling where it shouldn't. You poke it clear with a tool and listen for the soft thud as a stuck slug drops through. Then you return to casting. The next slugs look better. The light letter returns to normal weight. You can trust the machine again, for now. The proofreader's pencil keeps arriving with small messages, a misspelled street, a comma inside a quotation that should be outside, by the paper's style, a hyphen that should be an N dash, or at least the closest your shop can manage. You handle them one at a time, and in between, you keep your awareness on the missing matrix issue. It appears again in a sports brief, a player's surname. Same letter, same silent non-drop when you press the key. This time you don't even pause long. You reach to the rag where you've kept a small borrowed matrix waiting. After the first borrow, you decided to keep one close, just for the hour. You didn't want to keep walking across the room, so you arranged a quiet agreement with your neighbor. You keep it wrapped in a corner of cloth so it won't pick up grit or a burr. It's a simple loan, but it changes the way you work for the next stretch. Now, when that letter goes missing, you don't have to leave your station. You just reach, slide the matrix into the assembling line, and continue as if nothing happened. But you have to stay aware in a new way, because every time you borrow that matrix, you also borrow the responsibility of catching it again before distribution. So you make a small routine inside the larger routine. Set the line, cast the slug. Watch the return. Pluck the borrowed matrix out at the same point every time, like catching a coin before it rolls away. You choose a consistent moment when the matrix comes into view near the top track. Your fingers learn that motion quickly. In the middle of setting sports scores and school board notes, you're also doing this tiny act of interception. It's delicate, but it becomes ordinary after a few repetitions. The other operator doesn't look over anymore. He trusts you've got the borrowed piece under control. And you don't let yourself get casual. A borrowed matrix that slips into the wrong channel can become a second jam, worse than the first. So you keep your eyes soft, your hands steady, and your mind on the path the metal takes. The proofreader comes back with another handful of galleys. He sets them down in a tidy stack, then taps the top page with his pencil. One word is transposed, one figure needs a point, not a comma, because it's a market quote. And one line has a letter that looks slightly bruised, a serif not quite clean. You don't argue. You just sort the notes into two groups, what must be recast and what can be left alone. You take the bruised letter slug first. Cosmetic errors are often the first sign of a deeper drift, temperature, mold cleanliness, or a tiny bit of dross you didn't catch. You pull the slug and you hold it close to the light again. The face has a faint matte patch, not full frosting, but not crisp shine either. That tells you the metal and mold met each other slightly reluctantly. So you choose to recast this one line, not because it's dramatic, but because it's early. If a line is already marginal on a proof, it can be worse on the press. You set it again, slow and deliberate. You avoid the temptation to increase speed just because the rest of the room is moving. You let the line justify gently, and you listen for the firm tightening that says the band's seated well. The cast comes out sharper this time. You can see it even before you tilt it, because the surface catches light cleanly. You put the corrected slug into its spot, and you mark the proof sheet as handled. One problem returned to order. Then you go to the market figure. It's the kind of correction that looks small on paper and becomes awkward in metal. A point instead of a comma changes width. It changes the spacing around it. And in a column of figures, one changed character can disturb the alignment. You pull the whole line and you check the measure. You don't want the numbers to drift into a crooked pattern. So you decide to recast not only the line but the one above it too, creating a cleaner pair. It costs you an extra slug, but it saves you from fighting a spacing compromise later on the stone. You cast both lines and you set them in place. You run your finger lightly across the ends in the galley, making sure they're square. Then you glance at your pot again. The level is lower now because you've been casting steadily through all the fixes. The reservoir mark is approaching the point where the pump starts to sound different. A faint change in tone, a slight extra gulp. You don't wait for that sound. You add another ingot now, while you have a natural pause. You lower it in slowly, letting it warm before it sinks. The surface tightens for a moment, then relaxes. You wait because the pot needs time to return to an even temperature. While you wait, you look at the battered matrix still sitting aside, the one that started this whole scarcity. It's still there, quiet, like a reminder. A mechanic will handle it later, but later can be hours away. And between now and later, names will keep arriving. So you make another decision, practical and cooperative. You won't just borrow one matrix. You'll borrow a handful, enough to get you through the last busy stretch without constant catching and returning. But you also don't want to empty your neighbor's magazine and create his own shortage. So you negotiate in the smallest possible way. One whispered exchange when his machine pauses. You ask for 2 more of that letter. Not many, just enough. He checks his channel. He can spare them because his copy at the moment is light on proper names. He gives you 2, You wrap them in cloth beside the first, like spare buttons. Now, when you need that letter, you can insert one, cast, and keep moving. And instead of catching the same piece over and over, you can rotate them. It's less elegant, but it reduces the risk of fumbling under pressure. You still catch them before distribution, but you do it less often in small batches. Set several lines that need the scarce letter, then pause, intercept all borrowed matrices as they rise, and return them to the cloth. It becomes a new cycle. The room around you continues its own cycles too. The stone man is now assembling later pages, moving chases like trays sliding furniture into place. A hand compositor finishes a small patch and carries it over with careful hands. The proof press keeps making its soft tack tack tack, a steady heartbeat. And in the background you hear a distant change downstairs. The press room sound shifts. A deeper rumble begins, faint through the floor, like a heavy machine turning up to speed. Page 1 is running. That doesn't end your work, but it changes the shop's posture. Once the press starts, corrections become more expensive. Not impossible, but a correction now means stopping a run, pulling forms, relocking, and getting ink back into balance. Everyone becomes slightly more careful with what they ask for. Editors upstairs will still send changes, but they'll think twice because the press is already moving. A boy comes down with a fresh bundle of copy for an inside page. A local event listing, a public notice, and a long column of legal text. Legal notices are slow work in a different way. They don't ask for creativity, but they ask for stamina. The sentences are long, the punctuation is dense, and the names can be unfamiliar, full of those rare letters your magazine doesn't love. You read the first paragraph once, just to see what kind of terrain it is. Then you begin. Key by key, matrix by matrix, line by line, you keep your posture quiet, shoulders down, hands loose. A Linotype rewards relaxed hands more than tense ones. Tense hands hit keys too hard, and hard hits can cause doubles. 2 matrices when you wanted 1. Doubles become wrong words. Wrong words become recasts. So you let each key press be firm but gentle. As the legal notice grows, your galley fills with slugs, warm metal bars, each one a small sentence segment. You slide them forward, keeping them aligned, keeping the story in order. You can't let yourself mix lines here. A legal notice has to be exact, because people read it with different eyes than they read sports. They read it looking for their own name, their own lot number, their own street. And if it's wrong, it's not just embarrassing. It's a problem that can echo for weeks. You reach a name that needs your scarce letter again. This time you don't pause in surprise. You already know what will happen. You stop at the point in the line where the missing matrix should be. You open the assembler, slide in a borrowed matrix, and continue. The line becomes whole, you finish it, justify, and cast. Now you let that borrowed matrix travel upward with the rest, but you watch it carefully. At your chosen point, you lift it away. You do the same for the next borrowed one, and the next, until your cloth holds them again. It feels almost like tending a tiny flock, keeping them from wandering into the wrong place. You carry the legal notice galleys to the proof press. The proofreader inks them and pulls a sheet. When he lifts the paper, the text looks dense and official, small letters marching. He scans it with quick, trained eyes. He doesn't read for meaning, not really. He reads for misprints, broken letters, spacing, and the small sins of the machine. He marks 2 lines. One has a transposed letter, and one has a spacing issue where justification opened a small gap that looks like a crack. You accept both marks without reaction. One is your fingers, one is the line's word lengths. Both are fixable. You take the marked proof back to your station, pull the 2 slugs, and recast. The transposed letter is simple. You dump the line before casting if you catch it early, but this one already exists in metal, so you remake it carefully, then replace it. The spacing issue takes more thought. You can't change the words. So you adjust the break. Moving one short word to the next line, it changes the justification pressure. It makes the spaces distribute more evenly. When you cast the revised line, it looks calmer, less like a stretched mouth, more like a settled sentence. You replace it in the galley and tap the ends square. Then you carry the corrected galleys back again for a second proof. The proofreader pulls another sheet. This time he nods and sets it aside. Acceptable. Not perfect, maybe, but clean enough for the page. That word, acceptable, has a particular weight in a daily shop. It doesn't mean careless, it means finished enough to meet the world. And the world, by noon, will be reading it while eating sandwiches at desks, while you're still here, surrounded by metal and ink. The foreman appears near your station again. His face shows the day's slow accumulation. Not panic, just the mild fatigue of constant decisions. He tells you the inside page is being locked soon, so any last corrections have to be handled now, while the stone is still open. You look at your galleys. You look at your borrowed matrices. And you decide to return the borrowed pieces before the lock, because once the next page goes to press, the room will shift again. And you don't want to carry a debt you can forget about. You walk the cloth bundle over to your neighbor. You place the borrowed matrices in his palm, one by one. He checks them quickly, not by reading letters, but by touch and habit. He slips them back into his magazine. The loan is closed. Now your machine is back to its own inventory and its own limitations. You return to your station and glance at the time. The shift isn't done, but you can feel the day turning. The high windows have moved from dawn light to a flatter, brighter tone. Dust is still visible in the beams, but it's less golden now. The composing room is warm, almost too warm near the pots. Your shirt sticks slightly at the back. Your hands smell faintly of oil and metal, and the rag in your pocket is heavier than it looks, soaked with the work. You get a small break in incoming copy. Not an official break, just a gap. So you do what Linotype operators always do in gaps. You clean, you open the Spaceband box and check for bent bands. Bent bands can cause bad justification. Bad justification can cause squirt, where metal flashes into places it shouldn't. You don't need that. You brush out the box carefully, removing tiny curls of dust. Then you check the mold disc area. Not a full tear down, just a look and a wipe. You find a small smear of metal on an edge, a little bright scab from a previous cast. That smear can keep a mold from closing perfectly. A mold that doesn't close perfectly produces slugs with fins, thin edges that cut fingers and print poorly. So you scrape it gently with the proper tool, then wipe the surface clean. You run a test cast. The slug comes out square, with no fin. You drop it into remelt and feel the quiet satisfaction of preventing a future annoyance. Then, as if the shop has been waiting for you to finish cleaning, another small rush arrives. A messenger brings a correction for an inside page headline, a single word change. Not long, but it will be set in a larger face, and those larger letters use different matrices and different magazines. In some shops, the headline is set on a different machine, or even by hand. Here, you can cast it if you swap magazines, or use a spare headline setup. The foreman asks if you can handle it quickly. You look at your machine, still warm, still behaving. You choose to handle it, but in a controlled way. You don't want to disturb your main magazine if you don't have to. So you use a spare magazine section, one kept for larger type, and you swap it in carefully. Magazine swapping is a quiet ritual. You loosen fasteners, lift the section with both hands, and seat the new one without forcing. You make sure it sits flush. A magazine that's slightly misseated can cause misdrops. Misdrops cause confusion. Confusion causes jams, so you take the time. The headline is short, you set it, cast it, and check the letters. Large type shows flaws more plainly. If a serif is rounded, you see it immediately. But this cast looks good. You hand the headline slug to the stone man, and he fits it into the page. Then you swap your magazine back. Again, careful. Again, No forcing. You return to ordinary text work with your machine still steady. It's midday now, and the first big wave of deadlines has passed, but the shop never becomes fully quiet. There's always an edition ahead, an afternoon run, a late sports update, a wire story that might come in and push something aside. The room lives in that state of readiness. You get another set of galleys from the proofreader, smaller fixes this time. A missing apostrophe, a quotation mark turned the wrong way, a period that should be a comma. These are the little grooming tasks that keep a paper from looking sloppy. You fix them in a calm sequence: pull, recast, replace, tap square, mark handled. Each one is small. Together they make the page feel cared for. And as you handle them, you notice your machine's behavior has changed again. Not in a dramatic failure, in fatigue. The Linotype has run for hours. Oil warms, thins, and moves. Dust accumulates in tiny places you can't see without stopping. The pot metal has cycled in and out, oxidized and refreshed. You can feel the machine's heat radiating more strongly now. It's not in danger, but it's a reminder that a machine is not a concept. It's a physical thing, doing physical work, and it has moods. The foreman walks past and tells you the mechanic will come by later to look at the bent matrix and the distributor burr. You nod. That's good, because even if you've smoothed the burr, you don't want it to become a weekly pattern. A distributor that jams once is a nuisance. A distributor that jams regularly becomes a schedule in itself. And then for a while, your work returns to the most ordinary part of the job.